That's like your mother, you know. Here's your money for allowance, but tell me what you spend it on, you know. It's pretty motherly. They want to know everything you do and everything you spend your money on. And that's coming next year, huh? A digital tracking system for every purchase. That's coming next year in Croatia. And England announced officially, no more conspiracy theory, that 2030 their system will be digital. So I'm pretty sure it's a cash system too. Pretty sure. And there's a lot of outcry, you know, of course, because people are going to lose their asses. Like when the central bank came here, when the European Central Bank arrived 3 years ago, prices went through the roof. People are going to lose their asses. They're going to lose their property, their houses, you name it. And so there's a lot of anger and outcry and anxiety. Of course, people don't like to lose all their freedoms and money. And they're going to be pissed. But to implement that system, we have to assume there'll be a crisis, a financial crisis of some kind. So let's say a banking crisis in 1 year before 2030. And then people are in such a panic and there's such tumult and disorder, they figure the population will openly accept order and a new system. Even though it takes away your rights and your money, you know, you're happy to have some order. You know, like when Corona was happening, people were very eager to stay home for 2 years. And not only that, anybody who disagreed got yelled at or persecuted gladly, zealously, let's add. So we could have that crisis coming in 2029, before, to usher in the change, the financial system. And that's what happened in the Great Depression. You know, a lot of people think the Great Depression was caused by the stock market crash in 1929. Well, that's not right. What really happened was Europe went bankrupt in 1931. The governments defaulted on all its debts. So like our huge debts now, every country has massive debts. They wrote them all off. And that's what began the Great Depression. You know, because a stock market crash cannot really create a recession, a depression. A stock market can only cause a recession because, you know, the investors and the speculating public lose their speculative money, but they don't lose everything. But when there is a depression, that means that the financial system collapses. There's debt restructuring, everything's written off, currency changes. That's a depression. That's when everybody loses everything, almost. You know? And that's what happened in 1931. There were bankruptcies. And Europe and America went from a gold and silver standard to a paper standard. And now we have to assume, so let's say a 2029 crisis will move the whole world from a paper standard to an electronic standard willingly, and people accept it because it could be crazy. We have to assume this is coming. What will happen is there'll be a crisis that's so severe that the people then will want order. And so, yes, normally, let's say today, the Agenda 2030, moving to a digital system, would react with protests and would precipitate anger everywhere and people on the streets. But we have to assume there's going to be a crisis, a financial crisis. And if it's a big disaster, then the people will want a new system. So in 1933 in America, people were not happy when the government confiscated their gold bars and coins. All of them. The banks closed for a few days, and the government went through everybody's private safe deposit boxes and took whatever gold was in there, confiscated it. You think that made people happy? They weren't happy, but it was a crisis. Well, what was it a crisis? It was a banking crisis created by the government borrowing too much. They went bankrupt and went from a gold standard to a paper standard, and they confiscated the gold in America and paid people some money for it, 50% they received of the value. I assume in the next one they're going to get 10% of your money. Your bank account will close on the weekend. When the next few days, when the bank system turns back on, who knows how much money will be in the bank. You know what Roosevelt did that changed America most fundamentally? Roosevelt totally flipped the tax system in America. Because in America, before him, before the Great Depression, there was a taxpayer, let's say an average person in America working, paid most of their taxes to the local government. So let's say out of $1 of taxes, the local government received 60 cents. The state government received 35 cents. Only 5 cents out of every $1 of taxes paid in America was captured by the federal government. Only 5. And that kept the government small because the government didn't have money. It couldn't just spend it on crazy things like whatever, like now global projects. It couldn't do that. It kept the government small. Well, Roosevelt flipped that around. So now, 70 cents of our taxes goes to the federal government. 30 cents out of that 70 goes to the foreign bankers to pay for the interest on the national debt. State gets the second amount, and the city mostly receives taxes through sales tax. But it wasn't like that before President Roosevelt exploited the crisis of the Great Depression to change the whole system around. And then he started the CIA, the FBI, he started Social Security, where they take 10 cents out of everybody's paycheck and puts it into, forces people to loan money to the U.S. government. That's what they do with Social Security. They buy government debt. So it's a forced loan. All these things started, national big projects, nationalized the teaching system, and took away a lot of power from the state and local governments who no longer had funding. Redirected it to the federal government, and then the central government now is massive and global. And that was Roosevelt.